Arthur, if you don't sign this confession, you leave here with nothing, the HR director whispered. Ryan Caldwell smirked from the corner. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out without a word. That was the day they signed their own death warrant. Let's go back, but to understand how a $50,000 legal retainer and a few lines of open-source middleware brought a $60 million corporation to its knees, we have to look back 12 months. For 15 years, I was the guy who kept the integration channels running at Caldwell Enterprise Solutions. My official title was Managing Director of Enterprise Accounts. In reality, I was the translator between the complex API architectures of our clients and our company's proprietary software. I managed 3 primary accounts: Apex Retail Group, Vanguard Logistics, and Sterling Healthcare. Together, these 3 clients accounted for 60% of our annual recurring revenue. In enterprise sales, executives like to talk about cloud-based scalability and automated pipelines, but the truth is much more mechanical. The software is just code. The service is the integration. My clients didn't stay with Caldwell because the software was perfect. They stayed because of the middleware, the custom integration gateway that linked their legacy databases to our platform. It was a proprietary piece of software that I had developed through my personal shell company 10 years ago, before I joined Caldwell. When I was hired, I signed a non-exclusive sublicense agreement with Caldwell. They could use my integration middleware to service their clients, but the ownership of the source code remained with my LLC. My relationship with the clients was personal. I knew Marcus Vance at Apex back when he was a junior logistics planner manually entering shipping manifests. I had helped Sarah Jenkins at Vanguard design her first automated warehouse routing protocol in Chicago. And I had spent 3 straight nights in Sterling Healthcare's server room with David Clark when a bad SQL injection threatened to wipe out their patient scheduling records. They trusted me. When you manage enterprise systems, you aren't just selling a license. You are selling a guarantee that someone will answer the phone at 3 in the morning when the database locks up. My compensation was structured around that trust. I had a 3% commission on the annual recurring revenue of these 3 accounts, which brought my annual payout to over $300,000 on top of my base salary. It was a fair price for keeping 60% of the company's revenue stable, especially since Richard Caldwell was actively trying to sell the firm to a private equity group. The alignment shifted in January during the annual shareholder dinner at the St. Regis. Richard Caldwell, our 62-year-old CEO, was standing at the podium talking about streamlining operations and preparing for the next phase of growth. Richard was desperate to cash out. His retirement plans depended on a successful acquisition by a private equity firm called Granite Capital. But Granite Capital was demanding a 15% EBITDA margin improvement before they would sign the final buyout agreement. To deliver those numbers, Richard introduced the new vice president of global sales. It was his 32-year-old son, Ryan Caldwell. Ryan had spent the last 4 years at a mid-tier consulting firm in Manhattan, a job his father had arranged to build his resume. He wore a bespoke Italian suit that looked a little too sharp, and he had the cold, mathematical focus of someone who only saw employees as line items on a spreadsheet. He didn't understand the technical architecture of our systems, and he didn't care to learn. To Ryan, enterprise sales was a solved equation of automated sequences and junior account reps reading scripts. The following Monday, Ryan called a meeting in the main conference room. He was accompanied by Thomas Vance, a board member representing our primary venture capital partner. Thomas was a tall, silver-haired man who rarely spoke but held massive sway over the board's voting blocks. He and Ryan had formed an alliance. Their objective was simple: cut operational costs immediately to inflate the EBITDA for the Granite Capital buyout. During the presentation, Ryan displayed a slide showing our sales commission structures. My 3% commission was highlighted in red. In the modern SaaS model, Ryan said, pacing the room in his leather loafers, high percentage commissions, these legacy aches are an inefficiency. The integration middleware is already built. The clients are integrated. We can transition these accounts to a centralized customer success pool managed by junior reps. This will save the company over $250,000 annually in sales overhead. I sat at the end of the table, my hands folded. I looked at Thomas Vance. The board member nodded in agreement with Ryan. I looked at Richard Caldwell, who was sitting next to his son. Richard looked away, staring at his notebook. He knew the risk, but the pressure from the VC partners to hit the Granite Capital EBITDA targets was too strong. After the meeting, Ryan asked me to step into his office. He didn't waste time with corporate pleasantries. "Arthur," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "we are restructuring the enterprise accounts. We need you to hand over the client relationship logs and the API documentation for Apex, Vanguard, and Sterling. We are transitioning them to the junior success team next month. Your commission structure will be adjusted to a flat 0.5% retention bonus." I looked at him. "Have you reviewed the MSAs for those accounts, Ryan?" I asked. Ryan smiled, a thin, dismissive line. "The contracts are with Caldwell Enterprise Solutions, Arthur. The clients are locked in for another 18 months. They aren't going to migrate their entire database structure over a change in account managers. It's too expensive." I stood up, adjusted my cuffs, and walked out without saying another word. Ryan thought the technology was the lock. He didn't realize that the key was the person who knew how to turn it, and he had no idea that his attempt to save $250,000 was about to cost the company $12 million. For 3 weeks, I went about my daily routine, maintaining the integration pipelines and documenting my work as if nothing had changed. I kept my interaction with Ryan strictly professional, log entries updated in Salesforce and code updates pushed to Git. I didn't mention our meeting to anyone. In a corporate environment, silence is a shield. If you show anger, you give your opponent information. Ryan assumed my silence was defeat. The ambush occurred on a Tuesday afternoon in early February. Richard Caldwell was in New York for preliminary meetings with Granite Capital. It was the perfect window for Ryan and Thomas Vance to execute their plan. I received a calendar invite at 3:45 p.m. for a meeting at 4. The subject line was simply, "Policy Review." The location was Conference Room C, the windowless basement room where the company quietly handled terminations. When I walked in, Evelyn Vane, the HR director, was already seated at the glass table. She had a thick manila folder open. Evelyn was a corporate survivor who had spent a decade delivering bad news with a sympathetic tilt of her head. Ryan was standing near the whiteboard, tossing a dry erase marker in the air. The room was cold, smelling of stale carpet and industrial disinfectant. "Arthur, please sit down," Evelyn said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. I sat down. "I didn't bring a laptop or a notepad. We have a serious issue to address," Evelyn began, looking down at her notes. "Our security team conducted a routine audit of our remote access logs last week. They flagged multiple external logins under your credentials." Ryan caught the marker and leaned against the table. "Specifically, Arthur, you accessed the main database integration server for Vanguard Logistics on a Saturday night at 11 p.m. You logged in from an unauthorized personal iPad, which is a direct violation of our newly implemented Bring Your Own Device security policy." I looked at him. The BYOD policy had been pushed through by Ryan's department 3 weeks prior, buried in a 50-page employee handbook update that everyone was forced to sign electronically. That Saturday night, Vanguard's main shipping API had locked up, freezing 22 freight trucks at the Chicago terminal, I said, keeping my voice flat. The company's VPN was experiencing a gateway error. The lead infrastructure engineer, Dave Martinez, called me on my personal cell phone. He authorized the access. "I have the whitelisting request." "That doesn't matter," Ryan snapped, his voice sharp. "Dave Martinez is an engineer. He doesn't have the authority to bypass corporate security protocols. You used an unsecured personal device to access live client data. That is a material breach of security." Evelyn slid a document across the table. "It was a separation agreement and release of claims, because this is a security violation, Arthur," Evelyn said, her head tilting slightly. "We are terminating your employment for cause, effective immediately. Under the terms of your equity package, a termination for cause voids the acceleration of your 50,000 unvested restricted stock units. It also invalidates the double multiplier severance package in Clause 8B of your employment agreement." I looked at the document. It was a complete surrender. By signing, I would acknowledge that I had committed a security breach, waive all claims to the RSUs, which were worth roughly $1.5 million before the acquisition, and agree to the strict enforcement of the 2-year non-compete clause, which would prevent me from working with any Caldwell client in the state of California. "If you sign this now," Ryan said, his tone softening into a patronizing drawl, "we won't pursue legal damages for the security breach. We'll report it as a mutual separation to future employers. But if you walk out that door without signing, We will file a civil suit for damages and blacklist you from every enterprise firm in the Bay Area. They had calculated this perfectly. They believed the threat of a lawsuit and the loss of a $1.5 million stock package would break me. They expected me to argue, to show them Dave Martinez's authorization email, to plead for my severance. That is what most people do when they are ambushed. They get emotional, they try to explain, not realizing that the decision has already been made. I looked up from the paper and met Ryan's eyes. "I will not sign this," I said. Evelyn's sympathetic expression vanished, replaced by a cold bureaucratic stare. "Arthur, if you don't sign, you leave here with nothing. No severance, no stock, and a lawsuit on your record." "I understand," I said. I stood up and buttoned my suit jacket. "Send the formal termination letter to my home address via certified mail. I want the exact security policy infraction and the login logs detailed in writing." Ryan stepped toward me, his face flush with sudden irritation. "You think you're smart, Arthur? You think you can just walk out and take these clients? Try it. Our legal department will freeze your bank accounts before you can even file for business registration. You signed a non-compete." I ignored him, looked at Evelyn and said, "Goodbye, Evelyn." I walked out of the room, went back to my office, and began to pack. I took only my personal items, my brass desk clock, and a photo of my family. I left the company laptop and the security keycard on the desk. As I drove home through the rain, the initial adrenaline faded and a cold weight settled in my chest. I wasn't a young executive with nothing to lose. I had a mortgage in Marin County, a daughter who was starting college in a year, and 50,000 unvested RSUs that were now locked in a legal vault. Fighting a $60 million company meant hiring high-priced representation. The next morning, I sat in the glass-walled office of Sarah Goldstein in downtown San Francisco. Sarah was an employment lawyer who specialized in executive disputes. She listened to my story, reviewed my employment contract, and looked at the draft separation agreement. "They're trying to starve you out, Arthur," Sarah said, leaning back. "They know California BPC Section 16,600 makes the non-compete void, but they'll be banking on the fact that you can't afford to fight them for the RSUs and the Clause 8B severance." "How much will it cost to fight?" I asked. Sarah looked at me, her eyes steady. "I require a $50,000 retainer to start. If we go to trial, it could cost 3 times that. We will have to fight their TRO and file a countersuit for wrongful termination, $50,000. That was a significant portion of my liquid savings. It was the money I had set aside for my daughter's first-year tuition. If we lost, I would be broke, blacklisted, and buried under Caldwell's legal fees. I looked out the window at the Bay Bridge. Then I pulled out my checkbook, wrote the check for $50,000, and slid it across the desk. "Let's go to work," I said. The first thing I did on Thursday morning was register Pendleton Consulting Group, LLC, with the California Secretary of State. By 10 a.m., the entity was active, and I had opened a business account with a corporate bank. I didn't rent an expensive office. I set up a desk in my study and used a virtual business address in downtown San Francisco. At 11 a.m., I drafted a single email and sent it to Marcus Vance, Sarah Jenkins, and David Clark. I sent it from my personal email address. "Marcus," I wrote, "I am writing to inform you that my employment with Caldwell Enterprise Solutions was terminated on Tuesday. Under California law, I am pursuing independent consulting opportunities through my new firm, Pendleton Consulting Group, LLC. I want to thank you for your partnership over the last 15 years. My personal phone number remains the same. Sincerely, Arthur." The email was drafted by Sarah Goldstein. It was careful, professional, and entirely free of solicitation. I didn't ask them to cancel their contracts. I didn't ask them to hire me. Under California law, direct solicitation of active clients before they terminate their existing agreements can still expose you to a claim of intentional interference with contractual relations. We had to be patient. We had to let the clients act. Within 20 minutes, my phone rang. It was Marcus Vance from Apex. "Arthur, what the hell is going on?" Marcus asked, his voice echoing in his car's speakerphone. "Some junior associate named Kevin just called my office. He told me you retired due to health issues and that he is taking over the Apex account. He didn't even know what our database schema looked like. They fabricate a security violation, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice calm. "They wanted to void my unvested stock options and my severance. I've retained Sarah Goldstein and we are preparing a wrongful termination suit." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Those idiots. They don't realize that our entire inventory system runs on the middleware integration you built. If that middleware goes down during our spring clearance, We lose $10 million a day. Kevin doesn't know how to run a simple SQL query, let alone manage our integration. I remained silent. I knew Marcus's legal team would already be looking at their options. I'm calling Sarah and David, Marcus said. We signed those contracts because of you, Arthur. We're going to look at our agreements. By Friday afternoon, the strategy was in motion. In enterprise software services, contracts are designed to prevent clients from leaving easily, but they also contain clauses to protect the clients from service disruption. In our MSAs, Section 14.3 was the keyman provision. It stated that because the integration middleware required highly specialized knowledge, the active involvement of Arthur Pendleton was a material condition of the contract. If Arthur Pendleton ceased to manage the account, Caldwell Enterprise Solutions had 30 days to propose a qualified replacement. Most importantly, during that 30-day evaluation period, the client reserved the unilateral right to suspend all monthly service payments without penalty. At 4 p.m. on Friday, the corporate legal department at Caldwell received 3 separate certified letters: Apex Retail Group, Vanguard Logistics, and Sterling Healthcare, formally invoked Section 14.3. They declared that they did not approve of the junior representatives assigned to their accounts. They demanded that Caldwell submit the credentials of a certified lead architect for their approval within 30 days. In addition, they exercised their contractual right to suspend all monthly service payments, effective immediately. The impact was instantaneous. Caldwell's monthly billing cycle occurred on the 1st of each month. By freezing their payments, the 3 clients withheld over $800,000 in recurring revenue. In the corporate software sector, cash flow is the oxygen that keeps the company alive during M&A negotiations. Caldwell was operating on a tight margin, relying on that monthly revenue to cover payroll and hosting fees, but the real damage was to the acquisition. Granite Capital's due diligence team was in the middle of reviewing Caldwell's books. In any standard buyout agreement, there is a clause regarding a material adverse change, or MAC. A MAC clause allows the buyer to terminate the agreement if an event occurs that significantly damages the target company's financial health or operational stability. When Granite Capital's audit team saw that 60% of Caldwell's recurring revenue was suddenly suspended and under threat of termination, they halted all negotiations. At 7 p.m. on Friday, my cell phone rang. It was Richard Caldwell. He was calling from New York. "Arthur," Richard said, his voice sounding thin and exhausted. "We need to resolve this. I was in meetings with Granite Capital when their lead partner called me into a private room. They've suspended the buyout. They know about the payment freeze." I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the city lights. "I'm sorry to hear that, Richard," I said. "Arthur, please," Richard said, his tone pleading. "Ryan made a mistake. He didn't understand the technical dependency of the accounts. I was in New York. I didn't authorize the termination. If you come back as an independent consultant, we can pay you a monthly retainer equal to your old salary, and we can vest your RSUs over the next 12 months. I took a deep breath. "Your son accused me of a material security breach to avoid paying my severance, Richard. You let him and the VC board members run the company into the ground to hit an EBITDA target. I've already paid a $50,000 retainer to my lawyer. We are filing the wrongful termination suit on Monday. Arthur, if the Granite deal collapses..." "We are looking at Chapter 11, Richard whispered. "The company cannot survive a 90-day payment freeze from Apex and Vanguard." "Then you should have checked the contracts before you let Ryan pull the trigger," Richard, I said, and hung up. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from Caldwell's outside litigation counsel. It was a draft complaint for an emergency injunction, accusing me of misappropriation of trade secrets and tortious interference. They were threatening to file it in the San Francisco Superior Court on Monday morning, unless I signed a transition agreement. On Monday morning, the legal battle moved to the San Francisco Superior Court. Caldwell's outside counsel had filed an ex parte application for a temporary restraining order, seeking to block me from operating my new LLC and communicating with their clients. Sarah Goldstein was ready. We sat at the defense table in a wood-paneled courtroom, waiting for the judge to review the briefs. On the other side, Ryan Caldwell sat next to his lead litigation attorney. Ryan's arms were crossed, his face tight with anger. He didn't look at me. "Your Honor," Caldwell's attorney began, stepping to the podium. "The defendant, Arthur Pendleton, is actively raiding our client base in direct violation of a signed non-compete covenant. In addition, He accessed our proprietary database servers using an unauthorized personal device just days before his termination. We have reason to believe he is using our proprietary integration architectures to transition these accounts to his new firm. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Martinez, looked over her glasses at the plaintiff's table. Is the non-compete enforceable under California law, counsel? Caldwell's attorney hesitated. Your Honor, because the defendant committed a material security breach, we believe the non-compete is enforceable as a remedy for trade secret protection. Sarah Goldstein stood up and stepped to the podium. Her voice was calm, clear, and authoritative. Your Honor, California Business and Professions Code Section 16,600 is absolute. The plaintiff cannot use an unenforceable non-compete to restrain my client's right to engage in his profession. Regarding the alleged security breach, we have submitted Exhibit A, which is an email thread from Dave Martinez, Caldwell's lead infrastructure engineer. The email whitelists my client's personal iPad and explicitly requests his remote assistance to resolve a critical database failure that was costing their client, Vanguard Logistics, thousands of dollars in delayed shipments. My client did not steal data. He resolved an operational crisis at their request. Sarah then submitted Exhibit B, which consisted of printouts of the incoming communications from Marcus Vance, Sarah Jenkins, and David Clark. In addition, the evidence shows that my client did not solicit these clients. The clients initiated contact with him because they were alarmed by his abrupt termination. Under California law, a client has the absolute right to choose their service provider. Judge Martinez reviewed the documents for a few minutes. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The application for a temporary restraining order is denied, Judge Martinez announced, closing the folder. The plaintiff has failed to show a likelihood of success on the merits or any evidence of trade secret misappropriation. The court will not enforce a void non-compete covenant. We will proceed to the discovery phase for the defendant's wrongful termination counterclaim. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was a massive victory, but the battle wasn't over. Sarah Goldstein's $50,000 retainer was already half gone, and we were just entering the discovery phase. While the legal battle was playing out in court, the operational crisis at Caldwell was worsening. Sterling Healthcare's CIO, David Clark, knew that his organization couldn't afford a long legal battle. Under the terms of the original software agreement, Sterling Healthcare held a perpetual license to use the custom integration middleware. They owned the specific API configurations and the database integration schemas that connected their hospital records to Caldwell's platform. To bypass the legal hurdles and avoid HIPAA compliance delays, David Clark executed an emergency service waiver. Sterling Healthcare did not migrate their data to my LLC's servers. Instead, they set up a dedicated, secure AWS cloud environment under Sterling's own corporate account. They then hired Pendleton Consulting Group LLC as an independent technical advisory firm to manage their database integration. Because the data remained on Sterling's secure servers, we didn't need to go through the standard 6-month HIPAA vendor onboarding process. We were operational in 48 hours. Vanguard Logistics and Apex Retail followed the exact same blueprint. They hired my LLC to manage their secure integration gateways under their own cloud accounts. Caldwell Enterprise Solutions was left in a technical vacuum. They still held the software licenses, but the integration middleware that made the software functional was now managed entirely by my firm. At 6 p.m. on Thursday, Ryan Caldwell made his final, fatal mistake. He called my cell phone. I didn't answer. California is a two-party consent state under Penal Code Section 632, which means recording a confidential phone call without both parties' consent is a misdemeanor, and the recording is inadmissible. But Ryan didn't talk to me. He left a voicemail. Under California law, a voicemail has no expectation of privacy because the caller knows they are leaving a recorded message. Arthur, you think you've won? Ryan's voice was slurred, trembling with fury. I know you're behind this payment freeze. You and your lawyer are trying to destroy the Granite buyout. We will spend every dollar this company has to tie you up in court for the next 10 years. I will make sure you lose your house in Marin. I will make sure you are bankrupt before we are done with you. I listened to the recording once, then forwarded the audio file to Sarah Goldstein. This is a goldmine, Sarah emailed back. It is clear evidence of bad faith, harassment, and an attempt to intimidate a litigant. We are adding this to our wrongful termination complaint tomorrow morning. By Friday afternoon, the pressure on Caldwell Enterprise Solutions reached a breaking point. The Granite Capital buyout was officially dead. The private equity firm withdrew their letter of intent, citing the ongoing litigation and the loss of 60% of the company's recurring revenue. The venture capital board members, led by Thomas Vance, realized that Ryan's gamble had destroyed the company's valuation. At 5 p.m. on Friday, Caldwell's outside counsel called Sarah Goldstein. They wanted to settle. The settlement meeting was held on Monday morning in a conference room at the Hyatt Regency, away from the offices of both companies. I arrived with Sarah Goldstein. Across the mahogany table sat Richard Caldwell, his lead corporate counsel, and Thomas Vance, the board member representing the venture capital firm. Ryan Caldwell was not in the room. Neither was Evelyn Vane. The board had already executed their terminations. Richard looked 10 years older. The confident, bronze-tanned CEO from the shareholder dinner was gone. He sat with his hands clasped on the table, staring at a black folder. Thomas Vance was the one who spoke first. "Let's get to the terms," Thomas said, his voice flat. "We have conducted an internal review of the circumstances surrounding your termination. The board has determined that Ryan's actions and the subsequent allegations of a security breach were not supported by the facts. Ryan Caldwell and Evelyn Vane are no longer with the company." Sarah Goldstein leaned forward, placing a document on the table. "We are prepared to settle," she said, "but we are not accepting stock. The company's valuation has collapsed, and the Granite Capital buyout is dead. We demand the 50,000 restricted stock units paid out in cash at the pre-termination value of $30 per share, totaling $1.5 million. In addition, we demand the full double multiplier severance under Clause 8B, which is $300,000, and the reimbursement of my client's $50,000 legal fees." Caldwell's attorney looked at Thomas Vance. The VC board member nodded slowly. He knew that if the case went to trial, the wrongful termination discovery would expose the board's collusion in trying to inflate EBITDA through bad faith terminations, leading to shareholder lawsuits. "We agree to the cash payout," Caldwell's attorney said, "but we require a mutual release of claims and a transition agreement to ensure there is no service disruption for Apex, Vanguard, and Sterling." "My client will facilitate the transition," Sarah said. "But the transition will consist of transferring the integration middleware licenses and service agreements directly to Pendleton Consulting Group, LLC. Caldwell will sign a waiver of all claims regarding client solicitation and tortious interference." Richard Caldwell finally looked up. He looked at me, his eyes hollow. "Arthur," he said quietly, "I built this company for 15 years. I wanted to leave a legacy for my family." I looked at my former boss. "You wanted to leave a legacy, Richard, but you let your son treat the people who built your company as commodities. You can't build a legacy on greed." Richard didn't reply. He looked down and signed the settlement agreement. The wire transfer of $1.85 million was completed by Tuesday afternoon. I paid Sarah Goldstein her remaining fees and deposited the rest into my business account. The money that was meant for my daughter's tuition was safe, and my family's financial future was secure. Within 30 days, Pendleton Consulting Group, LLC had assumed full technical management of the integration gateways for Apex Retail, Vanguard Logistics, and Sterling Healthcare. Because we operated with low overhead, I was able to charge the clients 20% less than they were paying Caldwell, while increasing my own net profit margin by 50%. I hired Dave Martinez, the infrastructure engineer who had whitelisted my iPad and had been subsequently laid off by Caldwell, giving them a higher salary and equity in my new firm. Caldwell Enterprise Solutions never recovered. The payment freeze had drained their operational cash. Without the revenue from their 3 largest accounts and with their reputation damaged in the tech sector, they were unable to secure new funding. 6 months later, the board filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company's assets, including their proprietary software platform, were sold off for pennies on the dollar to pay creditors. Richard Caldwell was forced to liquidate his remaining stock to settle shareholder lawsuits. His dream of a retirement yacht in Monaco was replaced by a series of depositions and legal bills. As for Ryan, his career in the Bay Area tech sector was over. The story of the fabricated security breach, the lost $12 million portfolio, and the threatening voicemail had circulated through the local executive network. No venture capital firm or tech company would hire him. He eventually moved back to New York, working as a junior residential leasing agent, far away from corporate sales and far away from any enterprise clients. Sometimes, executives get so caught up in the spreadsheets and the EBITDA margins that they forget a simple truth. Contracts don't keep clients. The brand name on the building doesn't keep clients. It is the service, the relationships, and the trust that keeps them. And once you destroy that trust, the clients will find the loophole, and they will walk right through it, leaving you with nothing but an empty office and a stack of legal bills.